Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Hello and welcome back to the show. Do you remember that feeling when you meet someone, your heart skips a beat? Why is your heart skipping a beat? Your palms sweat, but your palms never sweat. And the coup de grace, the swarm of butterflies erupting from your gut. And this seems to only happen with a certain type or a select few types of people. Well, today we'll be examining the science of attraction, what draws people together, if this is enough for a relationship to stand the test of time, and so much more. And guiding us through this is social and personality psychologist Dylan Selterman, whose research interests include attraction and interpersonal relationships. He also teaches introductory psychology and statistics at John Hopkins University, so we're extremely fortunate to have his expertise today. Hi, Dylan. How are you going?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
So before we begin, I would love to know more about what your research on attraction has entailed so far.
Sure. Well, some of my research looks at the ways in which people respond to dating app profiles, since that is a big way that people connect and meet each other. And this includes some experimental research. So right now, my students and I are collecting data with some experimentally created dating app profiles. These are not real, but ones that we created in the lab. And we show them to people and ask them questions like, how attractive do you find this person? Would you go on a date with them? That kind of thing. But we're also interested in understanding live attraction. And we might try to get some kind of event where people can actually meet each other face to face, and maybe like a speed dating event or something like that in the near future.
Wow, that actually sounds so fun. I've actually been to a speed dating event before.
What was your experience with it?
It was interesting. I didn't find myself immediately attracted to anybody there. Might have been a bit of the pressure because there are all these different people that you have to meet, and it's not like you can choose. Okay, I want to meet this person, just this person. You have to kind of talk to everyone. So there's a little bit of pressure there. So maybe I don't know. Maybe other people's experiences are different. And if you go enough, it would be less pressure. But yeah, that's really fascinating. It serves as a great preface as well for our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, I would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Dylan? And the first question I have for you is, what do you do in your spare time?
In my spare time, I play a little bit of basketball with some friends of mine. We play during the week. I'm also into video games and podcasts. I'm kind of into that. I do some exercise, do a little bit of cooking as well. Spend a lot of time with my wife and daughter. And yeah.
Interesting. So what kind of video games do you play?
I like the old school kind of Mario video games. And yeah, I grew up in the 1990s, so I love the Super Nintendo genre of video games. And I also play basketball video games, but like whenever I'm with my brother and our friends back home, we always play the Mario games.
Yeah. Do you have like the old school Game Boys as well?
I'm sure buried in a closet somewhere we have the really old
No.
ones. The oldest one that I know we have is Nintendo 64. That
All
I know we have
right.
that because we still play it.
That's amazing. I've been trying to get my hands on a Game Boy for ages because I want to replay all of the Pokemon games, the older ones. And it's really hard to find like an original. There are lots of modded Game Boys now, but I really want to have like the cartridge and slot it in and have that whole experience. That sounds really fun. But you also mentioned that you enjoy cooking and listening to podcasts. So, what kind of podcasts do you listen to, and what are your favorite dishes to cook?
Sure. Well, as far as cooking, I love soup. All kinds of soups, all types of food, all around the year, I will be eating soup for sure. That's like kind of my go-to comfort food, that kind of thing. And just this week, I made a minestrone soup with chickpeas and vegetables and rice. And as far as podcasts, I'm a big sports guy, so I do follow a lot of sports podcasts. The Bill Simmons podcast is one that I've followed for a long time. Some fantasy football podcasts and Zach Lowe's podcast. So yeah, a lot of football and basketball stuff.
Okay, I have no idea what sports podcasts are about because I just don't keep in touch with sports. So, what do they talk about? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think a lot of it is just kind of it's meant to mimic the whole kind of just hanging out with your friends and talking about the teams and the players that you like and why you like them. It's kind of it's like an appreciation more than anything. It's not necessarily like, I mean, some of it is a real analysis of, why this team is doing better than that other team, but a lot of it is just, hey, we're having fun, you
Yeah.
know. It's like, a group of friends just hanging out and talking about the things that they enjoy. That's what I like about sports, is just that it brings people together.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time. So my last question for you before we end off this section here is, what is your definition of a relationship?
Yeah, sure. So this is I think not an easy question to answer. I remember about 10 years ago, I read a piece by some colleagues of mine where they were talking about the transition into a relationship. And they wrote that some experts believe the only thing that really defines a relationship is the label you give it. So you're in a relationship if you say you're in a relationship. And all the specific behaviors are not really unique or exclusive to relationships. Like sex, for example, can happen within a relationship and in the absence of a relationship. We connect with each other intimately, we sacrifice for each other, we share fun activities with each other. Those all happen in relationships, but they also happen out of relationships. So maybe the idea of a relationship is really the thing that really defines it. So anyway, I like that argument from my colleagues. I didn't create that. I thought, this was a good idea, but I'll say a little bit more about what I think is happening in terms of defining a relationship. Maybe it's not categorical. Maybe it's more just on a continuum. Maybe it's the extent to which people enjoy being around each other and how much they would sacrifice for each other. So people spending time with acquaintances or even strangers, but if you're in a relationship with someone, you want to spend time with them a lot more. You like them very much. Maybe an acquaintance, you like them moderately, but you're willing to sacrifice greatly for a relationship partner. And maybe you'll do a more modest sacrifice for a friend. If it's a close friend, maybe it's a big sacrifice. So thinking about, definitions, I think, that's what I would say about it. It's more the extent to which we are emotionally invested in another person or other people.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense actually, because sometimes our relationships with someone, or like the intimacy that we experience in a relationship with someone, does also depend on what we're going through or what the other party's going through at any given moment. So, well, we do have the tendency as humans to categorize everything, maybe because it feels so comfortable to us to categorize things. But if you remove those, yeah, it's basically like what you said, exists on a continuum, it fluctuates and stuff. So yeah, that's a really good introduction to our episode as well. Talking a little bit about really the definition of relationships. Um, I think this is a really good point to go into the topic that we have for today, which is attraction. How would you define attraction?
Right. So, thinking about definitions for attraction, we can draw inspiration from the definition of a relationship, which is, in a sense, based on the label we give it. So, when people feel attracted to each other, they see the potential for some kind of relationship with that person. If it's a sexual relationship that they desire, maybe the attraction feels more sexual, like lust.
Mhm.
And if it's companionship and intimacy that people desire in a relationship, then maybe the attraction feels more like you have a lot in common with the other person. You feel like you complement each other well. Sometimes people say they feel a spark when they meet someone, like they click together. And that part of that is envisioning a complementary relationship together. Now, if it's loyalty and dedication that you're seeking, then maybe the attraction is based on the positive qualities that they have, which would make them devoted. Like, they have your back, they go a long way for you. So attraction is often the precursor to a relationship. And depending on what you're seeking, the elements of attraction reflect those goals. And with initial attraction, there are some physical cues that draw people to each other. This could include appealing facial features like big eyes or a square jaw, proportionate space between the eyes or between the lips and the nose, body features like an hourglass figure in women or muscularity in men. So attraction is, in a sense, rooted in physical features, not for everyone, but for most of us. And I think initially attraction is based heavily on physical features, since those are usually the first pieces of information we get about someone, not just for romantic attraction, but even when we meet potential friends, we might be more drawn to someone who physically resembles us, who dresses like us, who has facial expressions like we do, who seems visually like they'd be a good person to connect with. And that happens with romantic attraction and platonic attraction.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, apart from physical attraction, particularly in relationships, what does attraction typically consist of? Is there like intellectual attraction as well, for example?
Sure. I mean, it could be that there's some kind of intellectual attraction based on intelligence. So just thinking someone else has a good sense of humor or they're fun to talk to, they say interesting things, and maybe they also appreciate what we have to say and they appreciate our intellectual qualities as well.
And apart from physical attractiveness that you mentioned does um, play some kind of role in initial attraction. In fact, it does heavily influence initial attraction. How do factors like proximity or similarity come into play as well?
Sure. So, just like with physical attraction, we tend to feel more drawn to the people around us because they're around us. It's hard to feel a sense of attraction to someone you've never seen who lives thousands of miles away. So, the proximity effect makes a lot of sense because it would be adaptive to feel connected to others in your community. If you're going to spend time and effort and energy pursuing a relationship with someone, we tend to feel like it would be worth our time, worth the effort to connect with someone where the relationship is more likely to succeed. And that is, usually going to happen more often with people who are physically close. And we tend to be similar to those around us in many ways in terms of shared culture, custom, upbringing. We talked about the, video games from the 90s, and like anyone who's a 90s child who knows The Simpsons and Seinfeld and these other bits of monoculture, you end up feeling a sense of shared identity with others, maybe who like the same music that you like, enjoy talking about the same things that you like to talk about. So Yeah, perceived similarity definitely matters, just like proximity and those other factors too.
Yeah, and many studies find that physical attractiveness is learned or acquired through culture or society. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Right. So I suppose this could mean that human cultures represent kind of variations on common themes. So maybe it's the case that people tend to prefer smooth skin, but then there's some cultures who really, really strongly prefer smooth skin. But I think really every culture does to some extent. There's no culture in which that kind of goes in the opposite direction.
Mhm,
So I think, the idea is that this is like a learned preference is kind of an odd way of thinking about it.
mhm,
I think it's like, people learn to enjoy food through culture and society. Well, it may be true that some cultures enjoy certain types of flavors and seasonings more than others do, but everyone eats, I think, everyone eats very similar food. At the basic level, we eat high protein, high fiber foods with sugar in them. There's no culture that doesn't have those ingredients. And so, with that, I think there's no culture in the world, for example, where, as an example, where facial hair would look better on women than it does on men. There's no culture where, women have deeper voices than men do, and people feel more attracted to, deeper voiced women. So it's not likely that it's something learned. It's more likely that it stems from evolved mechanisms.
mhm.
But that being said, I think there is a strong role for culture and society that it really just is about kind of variations on shared common themes.
Yeah. And what role do personality traits play in attraction and forming relationships? I mean, we do see 16 personalities. That's a huge personality. I don't know what to call it. I'm just gonna call it a system, like a framework. I think that works. Yeah, we see huge things like 16 personalities where they will tell you which types of personalities would be more compatible with your personality type. Um, so, how accurate is this information?
Mm. Yeah, I love thinking about individual differences and personality traits. And I think they do matter, but perhaps not exactly in the way that most people assume. When most people think about personality traits, they think about things like whether you're shy or neurotic or agreeable. But the traits that I think matter a lot more than those, the traits that are connected directly to attraction and relationships. So, for instance, you have what are called destiny beliefs and growth beliefs. Destiny beliefs are whether people think that relationships are effortless and it's a matter of just kind of finding a compatible partner. Whereas growth beliefs are whether people think that relationships take effort and that you may not have a perfect relationship at first, but you can kind of work up to it together as partners get to know each other. And this has implications for attraction because someone with destiny beliefs might give up on a potentially good relationship too soon if they feel like it's not working perfectly right away. Whereas a growth oriented person might see the long term potential and they're willing to make the effort. In some data from my research, I've seen how destiny beliefs lead people to be dissatisfied with the people that they're dating. And it's also correlated with the preferred methods for meeting people. So those who score high on destiny beliefs don't like meeting people online or through dating apps. I think they believe they're going to magically bump into someone and have like a meet cute moment, like in
Mhm.
a TV or movie, TV show or movie or novel where, two people meet for the first time in kind of like a charming, humorous and unusual way. And then they go on to become a couple. And what people need to realize is that these moments in pop culture are, they're completely fake. And most people in the real world don't meet each other that way. Usually people meet because they sit next to each other in class, or they get introduced to each other by mutual friends, or they both swipe right. And all of those are great ways of meeting people, by the way. And
Mhm.
but the beliefs that people have are kind of like a personality trait that make a difference in those outcomes of attraction and relationship development.
Yeah. And would you describe this destiny versus growth belief to be kind of like on a spectrum rather than binary?
Definitely. Yes. So you can have people who are kind of maybe in the middle And maybe I would be one of those people who's kind of like entertaining a little bit of the initial compatibility stuff, but also feels that relationships take effort. And these are not mutually exclusive. You can be high or low on both. You could be a destiny and a growth believer at the same time. You could say, I think about, initial compatibility is an important thing, but then after that, if we run into hiccups or problems or difficulties, then let's work through it. Let's, see conflict as an opportunity for growth and intimacy building rather than a sign that we're not right for each other, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I used to be definitely a destiny believer. I don't know what, like, I'm just gonna call that. I'm just gonna call myself the destiny believer. That's what I used to be. But I think over the span of like a decade, I just kind of grew out of it, and now I'm kind of somewhere in the middle because let's be real, the destiny belief, that's the dream. That is the dream, okay? Like I love my rom-coms. I love my little movie like meet cute scenario in my head, but realistically that's just not going to happen. And that idea that, and then, like, regardless of what problems that we're having, I have an undying love for somebody. I just am not the kind of person to be in that place of like, even if everything doesn't seem to be working out, I'm just gonna always be there. You know, so yeah, that's interesting that how these two beliefs can kind of connect somewhere in the middle as well. And it's probably also because, like, from based off of like personal experiences over time, it changes and stuff like that. um yeah, but getting back to my initial question about personality types, are there specific combinations that tend to work better in the long term?
Well, okay, let's look at a personality trait known as secure attachment style. That would be a personality trait that predicts people's tendency to trust others and feel comfortable depending on them and having others depend on them in reciprocity. And secure attachment is in contrast to insecure attachment. Sometimes that takes the form of something like anxious or preoccupied or avoidant attachment, where people tend to resist intimacy or feel to some degree uncomfortable with it. And in some cases with romantic relationships, feel more jealousy. And those personality types tend to be more often associated with relationship dissatisfaction, difficulty communicating, sometimes infidelity, sometimes breakups, depending on the specific partners. So yeah, personality traits in relationships long term that can play a big role. What I think is a little bit less clear is how those attachment styles would necessarily predict something like attraction. I think there are some studies that show if you just ask people, do you want a secure or an insecure partner, people say the secure partner is what they want, which is like, duh, obvious, of course people are going to say that. But then when you have people meet each other in person, the degree to which they are secure doesn't always seem to matter that much, in part because people might have other qualities that make them appealing. And ultimately, people feel attracted to each other based on things like, like we talked about, physical appearance, similarity, proximity, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I have seen a lot over the internet because I'm always I'm always looking around, looking what people say about their relationships and stuff. It's very interesting. But anyway, um, yeah, I do see a lot of people, particularly um, anxious attachment style people, who keep talking about how they end up being attracted to avoidant attachment style people. So is there some kind of connection there? Is there like an opposites attract kind of situation going on?
That's an interesting question. I think in some cases, and there might be an interaction here with gender, because I think especially when we think about socially constructed gender roles for men and women in relationships, I think people might perceive it to be a bit more normative for women to be on the more anxious, preoccupied side and then to be on the more avoidant side or the more like emotionally distant side. And I think, to some extent, those are simply stereotypes and do not reflect the modal experience because most people are secure. That's another piece of information from attachment theory. The average person is secure in their attachment style and a minority are insecure. But it could be the case that there's something about anxious people and avoidant people that makes them feel drawn together, especially in the context of these gender roles. And there's some studies also that show that when people with these insecure attachment patterns end up in relationships, they can actually be more stable over time, less likely to break up, that is, compared to a relationship where one person is secure and the other's insecure. In those types of relationships, people tend to break up with greater frequency because the secure person realizes, oh, wait, there's something wrong here. I don't think this is how it should be. And they kind of, exit the relationship and look for something that they feel might be better. Whereas with two insecure people, they might, in a sense, reaffirm each other's anxieties or apprehend, whatever insecurities they have, they're kind of reinforced by each other. There's not that much research on this, but there's some data that points to that.
Yeah. And people often confuse attraction with love as well. So, how do these two concepts differ from each other?
Sure. Well, many psychologists define love in terms of things like intimacy and commitment, as well as passion. And if you think about high levels of intimacy and commitment that you normally see in a relationship where people love each other, I don't think it's possible to have that right away in the attraction phase. Like, how can you have deep intimacy or commitment to someone you just met? Now, you might have some degree of passion, but even that tends to peak later on as people are falling in love. So the falling in love stage tends to happen after the initial attraction phase. So the initial attraction phase, like we talked about before, I think is kind of like seeing the precursor, the seeds are planted. There is something there that has the potential to become this relationship down the road that has more intimacy and commitment in it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like a lot of people are probably conflating that the excitedness in the initial stages with that deep passion that someone feels when they feel love. But we also often hear about love at first sight. So what factors go into that instant attraction? Do hormones and pheromones play a role in that at all?
Right. So I think love at first sight is something that's also not very well understood. I think it could be more realistic to say love at first meet, but even that is not necessarily the kind of love that we know more about that evolves over the course of a relationship. And the colleagues of mine, like Suzanne Riella, for example, and Art Aaron, who have studied the process of falling in love, tend to see that it doesn't just happen right away. It's not the kind of thing that people report feeling the deepest falling in love feelings. They tend to come after that initial attraction phase. And it's usually over a period of weeks or even months. And it tends to peak around that time. So, maybe if we want to speculate a little bit on love at first meets, I think it could be the sense that people just feel like they've met someone that really has the potential for this to be a deep, loving relationship at some point soon. And that feeling of attraction is not quite the same as love in that case. And you also asked about things like hormones and pheromones. And I think it's more. I mean, there's definitely biology here. There's biology in everything that we do, and I think maybe what people are feeling here is just kind of a positive gut feeling, like an intuitive feeling that they can't describe when they're really drawn to someone right away. And I'm not sure it necessarily has to do anything specifically with hormones or pheromones, but there's definitely biological components there. It's just more like an instinctive feeling. It's kind of like, when someone says they love a food, they don't really love the food. They just, they're really excited to eat it and it tastes really good and they're enjoying it. And I would say, that happens with people too. That's the kind of feeling that they have right away. But it's not like it's driven by pheromones or something like that.
So we talked a little bit about how opposites attract is such a widely used phrase earlier on, but conversely, there's also something called the similarity attraction effect, where we like people who are similar to us. And there was actually a study by Boston University suggesting that this may be due to an assumption that someone who shares a single characteristic with us is more likely to share their entire deeply rooted essence as well. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Sure. So the idea of opposites attract is kind of a popular meme, but as you suggested, I think there's more evidence for the idea of similarity. I think the perception of opposites attracting is also interesting because it kind of implies that people are looking for ways in which they might be different from their partners in small but interesting ways. So if you hear someone say, I love chocolate ice cream, but my spouse loves strawberry ice cream, we're totally the opposite. And it's like, well, you both like ice cream, so there's a similarity right there. And if we add all variables together, you probably agree a lot more than you disagree on, especially with, more important stuff like morals and values. So I think the idea that we look for ways in which we're the opposite is kind of like we're, focusing on the 5% instead of the 95%. As far as the similarity research, I think what you might be referring to is similar to what some researchers might call like a halo effect, where you know one thing about a person and then take that bit of information and kind of generalize it to a lot of different things. So in the context of meeting strangers, the halo effect is something that might manifest with something like knowing that a person has a degree in something and then assuming other positive qualities about them based on that perception of expertise. We might assume that they're more creative or more morally upstanding or more warm and friendly or something like that. And that it could be the case that people in the context of attraction see something specific that they like in another person that they feel is similar to them, and then assume lots of other types of similarities that may or may not be there.
Yeah, that is so true. I tend to do this as well, not in my relationship, but I'm sure I do this in my relationship, but I do it elsewhere as well, where I go like, oh, you like cats, and I immediately feel drawn to them platonically. I just go like, oh, it's a cat lover, and I just want to be around them. But then that's kind of presumptuous to be like, just because you love cats you're a great person. um anyway, yeah, so that's really interesting. And during courting or dating as well, playing hard to get is a technique that many people do employ. Does this technique actually render the user more attractive to the recipient at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends because in some cases, when researchers try to study this, they say, oh, we're going to measure whether playing hard to get or using these dating games makes a person more attractive. But they're kind of looking at it in a very specific way. And sometimes they're doing experiments where they manipulate the information that people might get about a potential partner. And the potential partner is saying something over text that's like very warm and friendly, more direct. And then in the other condition, it's more like something cold and distant. And people don't usually like that kind of behavior. But I think playing hard to get could be more playful and silly, even. It could be self-deprecating. It could be something that is more mysterious or ambiguous. And there's not that much that we know about playing hard to get in that sense. Some data suggests that people enjoy mystery when meeting people, and mysterious people tend to be attractive. This is especially true for young women. And we're not exactly sure why that is. It could be that mystery is exciting and exotic, but it's also kind of in conflict with what you eventually want from a relationship partner, which is for that person to be more dependable and stable. You don't want to, be playing guessing games with your spouse in a 20-year marriage, right?
Mhm.
So this makes it difficult for scientists to study this in the context of attraction, because typically, if you ask people what kinds of qualities they're attracted to, they might list the qualities that they want in a long-term partner. But in an attraction context, those traits may not be as appealing as the kind that's more exciting and mysterious. So it's kind of like a catch-22.
Mhm.
If someone wants to play hard to get, they might seem more mysterious, but also appear to lack good relationship qualities. But if a person is straightforward, they might appear to have the good relationship qualities, but not be very exciting or mysterious. So I'm not sure that the evidence suggests that there is kind of a winning strategy for dating.
Yeah, I think part of that, this is just speculation, but I think part of that is also how mystery and attractive people are portrayed in media. I just This is annoying because I've talked about Gilmore Girls already in a previous episode, but I have been rewatching Gilmore Girls, okay, for the third time. And I noticed that one of the characters who is more of a suitable long-term partner, they're more straightforward, but yet the girl who is dating this guy ends up not feeling as attracted to him after a while, and there's a new mysterious person that comes along, and he doesn't talk ever. Like, he says one thing and runs away. Very conflicting actions and words, and very very few words, might I add. And for some reason, this main character is still is head over heels, can't stop thinking about this person, potentially. um and this is the character that I hear a lot of people fantasizing about being with themselves in real life, so may potentially, it could be like, oh, look at their relationships. It's so, they have such a deep connection, uh, and I want that for myself. And they end up trying to find that mystery, that novel romance that never actually happens long term. But that's just speculation. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And Esther Perel talks about this in her analysis of long-term monogamous relationships, about how first people crave the exciting, the unknown, the the lack of stability at first is kind of a thrill, but then we kind of want that stability eventually with our long-term partners. If we're going to commit to them and trust them and be interdependent with them, then we kind of want to know who they are and what they're feeling and what they're thinking. But that craving for excitement doesn't go away. We still want that. And these two things are in tension. So, she has this phrase, mating in captivity, which kind of refers to this idea that we want the stable domestic life that goes along with long-term relationships, but we also crave the novelty and excitement. And it's not impossible, but it is a challenge to have both.
Yeah, and particularly in long-term relationships, what is the importance of attraction?
It's very important. If people stop feeling attracted to their long-term partners, then satisfaction tends to go down. People get bored, they tend to cheat more, they tend to break up more. Feeling attracted to a long-term partner or spouse is really, really important.
Yeah, and it's really common as well to hear that someone in a long-term relationship has lost their attraction for their partner, or it's dwindled in some way, or their spark has fizzled out. What are the common causes for this attraction fading?
Right. Well, some research points to routine as a kind of, in a sense, the killer of excitement. So when you're doing the same thing over and over, day in, day out, which happens to a lot of us, we have our routines. People are creatures of habit. And we develop routines because they're efficient and they, in some sense, they feel good. We like what is reliable in a sense. But I think when you get into routines and habits, some of them might not be great. And some of them might also be, in a sense, boring. And we like excitement. We like to do new and exciting things and meet new people and connect with them. And I think the research shows that when people do new and exciting things with their partners more, then they tend to be happier in those relationships.
Yeah. And can attraction be nurtured at all?
Sure. I mean, I think when people nurture attraction, what they're really doing is working on themselves in a positive way. Like we tend to be attracted to and drawn to people who are, physically beautiful, but also smart and also personable and who are healthy and who are doing interesting and exciting things. So when we're talking about nurturing attraction, I think in a sense, what we might be talking about is just living a good life, being healthy, being happy, being, good at what you do in your job and your hobbies, and just trying to live the best life that you can. And people who tend to be good at life tend to be more attractive to others. And that could be one way to think about nurturing attraction in relationships.
Yeah. And other things, specific activities or exercises that couples can do to maintain or nurture their attraction for each other?
Well, we mentioned, doing some things that are new and exciting with your partner. Another thing that I'll suggest, there's some research that when couples have close couple friends, this tends to increase the intimacy that they feel within the couples. So having couple friends and being intimate with them is a good way to nurture intimacy in one's own relationships.
Wow.
And I think when it comes to other things that people can do, people can try, some of it involves like conflict resolution strategies. If people are, like I mentioned before, sometimes we get into habits and routines, some of which may not be very good or healthy. And it takes some effort to dig your way out of those habits and routines and build healthier ones. My wife and I recently have been practicing this exercise called the speaker listener exercise, where you just kind of take turns not doing anything else but listening to what the other person is saying, not trying to think about your response to try to respond to what they're saying, but just focus exactly on what they're saying and then paraphrase it. So just kind of say it back to them in your own words. And this is, I think, a surprisingly powerful tool because it makes people feel validated and respected and heard, even if you're not necessarily able to take action. Because I know your question was more about practices, but I think this is a practice where there's not really a goal of changing or doing anything. It's more just like, can we sit and can we speak to each other in a way that we're really listening intently and mindfully? And speaking of mindfully, I think, there's some other research showing that other types of practices like mindfulness meditation is good for couple satisfaction as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that with us. Those are some really, really good pieces of advice right there. But are there any challenges that arise when it comes to trying to establish these new habits and practices? Does it tend to weigh heavily on the couple if they're actively aiming to increase some sort of excitedness in the relationship?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's always going to be challenges, especially because, like I mentioned, we're creatures of habit. And if you get into a routine, sometimes one that lasts for years, it's just, it takes a lot of deliberate effort to kind of move out of that.
Yeah.
And there's also trade-offs. I mean, if you're spending more time on trying to create new things with your partner, there might be opportunity costs in other areas of your life. There might be ways in which you would have to cut back on other types of like hobbies and activities, and maybe cutting back on other things that are meaningful, other people that might be meaningful or important. And this is actually one of the areas where we see the most consistent evidence actually for couple satisfaction in the long term is when they have kids. And, kids are wonderful. We love kids, but like kids can be, for a lot of people, a relationship killer, because you're spending a lot of time nurturing these little creatures and you don't have as much time for romance. And when we make the decision to have kids, we are consciously making that trade-off. We're saying, yeah, the romance, the intimacy, the sex, the sleep, all of it is gonna get put in the back seat so that we can raise a child or children together. So yeah, that's a huge challenge, and it's it definitely was even more of a challenge in recent years because of COVID, and hopefully things are trending up for the young parents. But I know I can speak for myself. So our daughter was 2 years old when the COVID lockdown started 4 years ago. And, that was a really challenging period for us. And it's tough to look at that and say, oh, well, here's all these wonderful things that you can do in your relationship, when really you're just trying to tread water. You're just trying to stay afloat. So it's a big challenge, not easy.
Not for the faint-hearted. I look at parents and go, man, like it takes a lot out of you, and from it's also saying from this day onwards, it's not about me anymore. It's about somebody else. It's always going to be about somebody else. And I don't know. I'm pretty self-centered. I don't know if I could have a kid. I think I could, but I wouldn't I wouldn't do it. That doesn't make any sense. Like I wouldn't willingly go like, oh yeah, I'm having a kid now. I know I need to sort myself out first and like get my things in order, because that just sounds like a lot, and I'm already kind of I need to learn. So there's so much more I have to learn. So it's amazing what parents are doing. And how have you found how have you found it affecting your relationship?
Personally, yeah. Well, I'll share a little bit more. So, because my wife and I have had some, I guess, some other challenges as well. She's a breast cancer survivor.
Oh wow.
She was actually diagnosed during that first COVID wave, and so we were isolating with our daughter, and also, she was going through chemo treatments and eventually surgery. So yeah, it was a very, very dark period in our life. And we got a lot of support though from my parents and from our friends and neighbors. And that was, a really meaningful and important base of support and security for us. And then, from there, it became a lot of, in a sense, kind of rehabilitation, a lot of therapy, a lot of rebuilding, in a sense. So I think it's been uniquely challenging for us in that sense. We also did earlier this year a retreat with some other couples who one of them was a cancer survivor as well. And it was great to connect with them. A lot of them are parents as well. And I think, we kind of have this like understanding for each other and this ability to, be on the same wavelength in a sense. And it was just great to know that there's other people who are experiencing what we have experienced. And it's the kind of thing that, even if the active treatment is no longer happening, it's still kind of with you. It's still kind of like it's with you forever, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we have done and continue to do is look for, and I tend to be an optimistic person by nature. I always feel like there's so much that is within our ability to control and to move us in a positive direction. And that can be things like making small life changes or making big ones. Maybe it's a job change. Maybe it's moving out of your home and into a new home, or moving to a new city.
Mhm.
or branching out, making new friends, trying new things. There's a lot that we have at our disposal. There's a lot that a lot of options and a lot of possibilities, I guess. And I think that is the thing that I'm grateful I have not lost, and I know my wife has not lost it either, is this belief in the possible and belief in just, all the things that are out there in this world that are beautiful and that we can try to tap into.
Yeah. Well, congratulations to your wife for surviving breast cancer, and it's great. It's great that you guys found a couple of other people who have gone through the same things as you, because community is so important, and you may have support from people around you, but like friends and family, but it just doesn't hit the same as somebody who has gone through the same thing as you. It's like you're in a boat on a lake, and your friends and family are kind of at on shore. I actually don't know what the technical term is, on the ground, cheering and waving you on. In that sense, you're not alone, but it is definitely far different from having another couple in another boat that's nearby you, and kind of going and like talking it out and going like, is this what you're experiencing? Like the yeah. That was an
I love
interesting
that
metaphor.
analogy. That's great. Yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah, so it's wonderful that you found somebody else to talk to about this, and I loved hearing about what you've had to say this entire episode. I have learned so much from you. You're really articulate as well, so um that's wonderful. Good job. I think now's the perfect time to go on to the open mic section. This is your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the episode. So the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Sure. Well, let's improv a little bit here. I guess something that I've been thinking about a lot, because I am reading The Anxious Generation by John Haidt, who is one of my personal heroes. He's, an academic and professional role model for me, someone that I greatly admire. He's done a lot of great research, and he has this book about Gen Z and anxiety and distress associated with what he refers to as a phone-based childhood, with a lot of the dangers that come with smartphones and social media. And I think that this is resonating with a lot of people. I think a lot of people don't like digital technologies, and this is where I would take a different view. I don't think technology is bad. I think technology is good. I think technology improves our lives in a lot of ways. I think it actually helps us to connect and to maintain relationships. And I think it helps us to learn things. It helps us to grow and expand our horizons. It helps us to have fun and enjoy life. And so I would say that is, something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I'm feeling passionate about.
Yeah, that's great. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I have seen too many views on how technology can be such a what's the word? Such a danger to everybody, but I kind of view it as more of a tool. It's a tool, and it's what the human does with it that um like that affects what happens, and how technology affects us. And that's why education is so important as well, because that's how you learn about um media literacy, and identifying misinformation, disinformation, etc., and how to properly use or healthily use technology.
I agree. Yeah, and it's not going anywhere. So
Yeah.
we should learn how to use our tools properly, and instead of throwing them back into the sea.
Yeah, that's like saying a pair of scissors is dangerous because they're sharp. It's like you've got to learn how to use it. So yeah, that thank you so much, Dylan, for joining us today and for sharing all of your wisdom with us. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Sure. So my website is dylanselterman.com. You can also find me at Selter Mosby on Instagram, Twitter, Threads. and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.